This is our last day of the seminar. The title of the morning session is Self-Knowledge and the Freedom from the Self. And I would like to thank Professor Krishna again for coming. It's the last day. We really appreciate you being here every year. Wonderful. Thank you.
Good morning, friends.
Good morning.
We have talked about education and about the need to cultivate both knowledge as well as wisdom through education. The two processes are somewhat different. The acquisition of knowledge is an accumulative process which is building up memory, whether it is the acquisition of information or ability or skills. In all that, practice is involved, learning from someone who is knowledgeable is involved, and cultivating that ability through practicing, through solving problems and so on, making efforts is involved. So there is a path to it. There is a place for a teacher, and there is also such a thing as authority, because some people have great expertise in that field in which you wish to learn, and they can transfer that expertise to the student, whether he be a child or an adult. We'll call that the accumulative learning, because it's really the cultivation of memory. But there is this other learning which one calls self-knowledge, which cannot be acquired through another. It is not additive process. It is not something one can get from books, because books can give us thoughts, can give us ideas, but not perception. And self-knowledge is that knowledge which one acquires through one's own perception of what is true and what is false. In a sense, it is an unlearning process, because one is unlearning the false. Every time you perceive what is true, the false ends in the mind. So, how do we come upon all these false notions? And who am I? Who is the individual I'm trying to understand when I say the understanding of myself? When you look at yourself, we have a body which includes the brain, and we have something called consciousness, which is somewhat difficult to define because we are not able to measure it or scientifically explain it. We went into that in previous sessions. But intrinsic to consciousness is this capacity for awareness, and right from the time we are born till we die, we have this awareness. Every human being has this awareness. And within that field of consciousness, the brain throws up all kinds of reactions and inputs from the memory. And that becomes the content of our consciousness. The body, the scientists tell us, is a result of millions of years of evolution. And that includes the brain. So in that sense, the brain also has developed over millions of years, and all of us have the same brain inside, though the contents of that brain may be different. So Krishnamurti used to say, it's not your brain, it is the human brain sitting in there. What is yours is just the programming, your particular programming. When we are born, the brain is already programmed with the biological instincts. So there is that biological conditioning each one of us, which includes biological fear, possessiveness, sexuality, and all the various functions of the body, of course. So it's an ingenious organism, as we all know, and all of us share that ingenious organism and the instincts which are there. So those are facts. But after birth, there is the programming of the brain. It starts right from birth. And that is different for different people because we grow up in different families, in different countries, and we are instructed into different moral values, different religions. Then we go to school and learn different subjects. So all that which is stored in memory is different for me and for you. But the basic organism is the same because we share that common past, biological past of millions of years. We often forget this because we give too much importance only to our personality and our particular views and what we have learned during this lifetime since birth. But the fact is that we also have all this over the millions of years of past, which is common to each one of us. So all that is sitting there in my brain, responding, and I can't change that. It is something that is a fact. It's part of nature. Then there is the cultural past. I was brought up in a Hindu family and a theosophical family, and that the tenets of that family go back a few thousand years. And all that has been taught to me. So all that is sitting there also in the memory. And from there also the memory responds. So you find the Christian responds a little differently from the Hindu, responds differently from the Muslim, and so on. So we have different cultural past, which is now active in the present through the memories held in the brain. And then we have our own individual psychological past, because from the time one is born, all one's experiences are also recorded. So the brain is an instrument and it's doing its job of recording everything. The pleasures, the pains, the fear, the sorrow, the insult, everything is recorded and held there in memory. So that's my psychological past. So there is a cultural, biological past, a cultural past, a psychological past, and then all the knowledge and all the storing of the experiences which are also different for me and different for you. All that is in the brain. Since that is different for each individual, that's what constitutes individuality. That my 90% of the brain is the same as yours, but just this programmed layer, the superficial layer which is programmed within this lifetime, is somewhat different for you and for me. And yet we feel completely different. and we feel we are separate. We don't feel, we don't see, we are not aware of the fact that we are 90% the same as every other human being. If I may explain this with a metaphor, it's like having two identical IBM computers, one of which is programmed to do languages and another one is programmed to do accounts. And one computer can feel superior to another computer and say, I'm completely different from you because I can do accounts. It's something like this between two human beings. They are like two identical computers, only programmed somewhat differently because of the circumstances from birth till today. So different language, different food habits, different clothing and so on. All that. As we grow up with all this, two things happen. One is that a lot that is recorded in the brain is not necessarily true. It includes a lot of false information or false notions which are gathered as we grow up. But we are not aware that it is false. And therefore, it constitutes what one calls an illusion. And there are several illusions in the mind. And from these illusions, since they are different for me and different for you, we have different reactions coming up. And that produces a lot of division and violence and disorder in consciousness. But because it arises from illusions, it can be ended, because illusion can be ended since it is just a construct, mental construct or an image. It doesn't have any actuality in nature. The instincts, the brain is an actuality. The memories are an actuality. But the notions that are contained in them are not necessarily an actuality. And one can end them through discerning what is true and what is false. And this capacity for discernment is a somewhat mysterious capacity which is there in the human mind, that we are not completely trapped in the known. We can discover that it is false and drop it away. This process is what one calls self-knowledge. So self-knowledge is the process of discovering for oneself what is true and what is false, and therefore it is in the nature of an inquiry into oneself. It is the key to wisdom, because there is very little wisdom in a mind that is living with all kinds of illusions and is therefore not in contact with reality. So it's living in its own thought world, and those notions produce all kinds of reactions which are arising out of illusion. They are not necessarily from their instincts or they are not biological reactions, they are psychological reactions. That's why they can be ended, because illusion can be ended, and one can free oneself of all this psychological division and baggage which one carries. What is the nature of these illusions? They lie at various levels of our consciousness. At the very superficial level are what we call superstitions. If one has grown up as a Christian, one may have grown up with the notion that the number 13 is a bad omen, and then if you get a hotel room allotted to you or a seat in the aeroplane which is number 13, you feel a bit uncomfortable, you feel fearful that it's bad omen. That's just coming from that notion and is not actually a fact. Similarly, there are in every culture. In India, they believe that if the cat crosses the road, it is a bad omen. And so many people will turn back their car or their bicycle and go by a different road because they feel that they have been told that if a cat crosses the road, it's a bad omen. Whatever you're trying to do will not happen. You will not succeed. And so on. There are more dangerous beliefs, false beliefs, like some people believe that disease or illness comes because some god is angry with you, and therefore the response is to go and pray and seek forgiveness from God and so on. And that can have very serious consequences because they don't go to a doctor, they don't treat their child, they have this superstition. So there are many such consequences, a lot of fear, which is born out of such illusions. That can be seen through and goes away even with normal education, intellectual inquiry, and scientific inquiry. Then there are the cultural illusions, which are somewhat more deep-rooted. Each religion has taught different moral values. If you grow up in a communist country, then belief in God is considered to be superstition. If you grow up in India or in Rome, belief in God is a virtue, is a very good thing, and the mind is educated into that. So these values, they vary from culture to culture, and the child is trained into that. As I grow up, I get trained into those values which were prevalent in my family, and they are imbibed. They are not truths, they are cultural attitudes acquired from the past, from one's past. And sometimes they can have very serious consequences. For instance, for thousands of years, women were regarded as inferior to men, that they were meant somehow to be like assistants to men and help the man. The man is the leader of the family, and the woman must assist him in whatever he's doing, and so on. And therefore, they were kept away from certain professions and not educated highly, and so on. Those things have changed now, or at least in some part of the world they have changed. And yet for thousands of years this belief persisted. And that's a cultural belief, and it still persists, it still goes on. And there has been a lot of discrimination against the female sex based on this. And it was termed moral, it was called culture, it was called morality. It was not seen as discrimination. So that's, one may grow up in a family where the belief has prevailed that children must be regularly punished, otherwise they get spoiled. For a long time this belief was held, that spare the rod and spoil the child, that kind of thing. May not be true, but you grow up with it, you see that your father has been doing that, your uncle has been doing that, your neighbor is doing that, so you grow up with that notion, you don't know that it is false. Then that is the nature of illusion. Cultural illusion. Your particular culture in which you have grown has taught you that. So like that there are many illusions. Casteism is one of the cultural illusions built into Indian mind. And on the basis of that there is a lot of discrimination against certain castes which are regarded as low and certain other castes which are regarded as high. All these are part of cultural illusion. Nationalism is also part of cultural illusion, because we are just brought up with the idea that it's your country and your country is important and it must be important to die for your country and so on. Patriotism is propagated. So the mind begins to react like that. If my country is attacked, I feel fierce. It's like I am being attacked, and so on. All that is also part of cultural propaganda. So all that is cultural illusion. It is held in the brain, and if one doesn't free oneself of it, then you are trapped in the reactions. They fill up your consciousness. Deeper than that are psychological illusions. By that I mean, I have been insulted, I have been hurt, and I remember that hurt, and now I have this, I respond from that hurt, not only to that individual, but I also generalize and say, well, if he was a Muslim, then I say all Muslims are like that, or Christians are like that, and so on. Or a man has been wanting to marry a certain woman, and she didn't agree with him or left him, went away to somebody else, so he begins to hate women because he feels that women are untrustworthy and so on. So there are human beings who become women haters. And similarly, hatred between communities and so on arises from such generalizations from one experience. So that makes for what we call psychological complexes, and there can be a lot of fear, there can be a lot of feeling of enmity, suspicion, everything coming out of that. So those are psychological complexes. They are also stored in the brain, and when they are excessive, then one has to go to a psychiatrist or psychologist to get treated. But even when you don't need treatment, even in a normal human being, there are a lot of psychological complexes which he is himself not aware of, and he takes them as reality. Still deeper in our consciousness is this feeling of being a separate human being, a separate me, and feeling that I am a separate individual. The sages have pointed out, and Krishnamurti also pointed out, that that's an illusion. You think like that, you feel like that, but that is not true. You are really part of this world, and you are the same as the other human being. You are connected to everything, and you are, just because you identify with your personality, and you are attached to your personality, your notions, your particular programming, therefore you feel like a separate individual. You are not a separate individual. So that may be also an illusion. So I'm just pointing out that there are illusions at various levels of our consciousness, starting from the very superficial level of superstitions and going to cultural illusions, to psychological illusions, and finally the idea of being a separate me or a separate individual. All that has already happened. All that is in the past. That's the human being sitting here who has all these memories built in. So am I now permanently trapped in all this? Must I necessarily react out of these memories and respond in that way so that Krishna can't change? Something is already, the past has determined me completely. So that will determine my future. In which case there is no freedom. So that's why Krishnamurti talked about the importance of freeing oneself of one's condition. But what exactly does it mean to be free of one's condition? After all these memories are sitting there. I was born in a particular family, I didn't choose that. I grew up there, I acquired all that knowledge, went to school and so on. And all that is sitting in my brain, and I have had the experiences which I had. I can't wipe out all that. There is no way in which I can wipe out my memories. It's not like something written on a blackboard which can be wiped out. So it exists. The existence of those memories is a fact. The question we are asking is, am I completely trapped? Is everything predetermined by this? My reactions are predetermined because of my past? Or is there really freedom, which is possible? And freedom means what? Does it mean absence of conditioning? So one needs to examine that question. Does freedom from something mean the absence of that thing? Does freedom from my house mean the house has to be demolished? Does freedom from my wife means that she must disappear? So obviously it can't be that.